If you were to ask most gamers what the very first Nintendo console is, a whole bunch of people would say the NES. And some smartasses would say the Famicom, being that it came out before the NES, but they'd both be wrong. You see, Nintendo didn't just start off making really cool original Nintendo video game systems, they came out at the very start with a clone system of a Pong console. And that system is called the Color TV Game 6, and it was released in 1977. As soon as I brought this system home, I quickly discovered that I wasn't able to run this system on a couple of my monitors. And the reason was that in Japan, they used a specific channel to play this game console on that we don't actually have in North America. In fact, all the recording hardware I have to record all of our modern video game systems do not work with this box. So what I ended up having to do is I took it to the Personal Computer Museum in Brantford, Ontario, run by Sid Bolton, who helped me to capture this stuff by plugging this up to a certain VCR that could go to a high channel like 80 or 90, and from there we outputted that signal to a box to capture all the footage. As crazy as that is, it does work, and although there is some ghosting, you do see this on the original box itself when playing out on any of our TVs. So the signal you're seeing here, this image here, is the highest quality signal I could possibly grab from this system. And even though it doesn't look the greatest, it's still pretty cool. The number 6 in the title of the Color TV Game 6 is a reference to the 6 different games you can actually play on this system, which isn't really that descriptive because even though it says it's got soccer, hockey, and tennis, they're all just Pong. 6 variations of Pong. You got a different color scheme in between each and every game, and you have the option to have smaller paddles or bigger paddles or even more than one paddle. Now there are kind of really neat things that happen in this where you can have these kind of little strange walls in between that act as little deflectors for the ball, and that can be really fun and interesting. But at the end of the day, what you're looking at here is essentially just a big old Pong clone system. And even though it does say 6, there's actually like a hidden 7th mode if you just move the dial in between 2 different game modes and unlocks this negative world thing. But it still doesn't do much. It's just like a different color scheme, and it doesn't really change the game at all. By altering the options, you can have a bunch of different variations of playing Pong, which is really fun, but at the end of the day, it's just Pong. You're not going to find some hidden Zelda game on here, hidden Mario game. You're looking at something that's very basic and very bare bones. And despite the fact that Nintendo's name is on this thing, remember, this is their very first foray into the video game console market. So what you're looking at here doesn't have any of the really amazing Nintendo properties or really cool Nintendo ideas you would get in future systems. This is essentially a ripoff, and that's what it is. Now I know because the system has the Nintendo name on it, you're probably assuming that this is probably the best Pong system ever made. Well, it's not. It's really, really not. Sure, it's got a couple of different game boards and variations in colors on the Pong game itself, but the dials suck. And when you're looking at something as simple as a Pong game, the dials kind of have to be a lot better. You see, in other Pong systems that were made around the same time, the dials themselves were analog inputs, and they usually had some end to the way that they moved, or maybe some weight to them. And you know, games like Arkanoid existed that also had that little dial, and those dials work really well because they allow you to move left and right with a little bit of weight and a little bit of momentum. But with this, you don't have that. As soon as you turn left or right on the dial, your little board just moves up and down in one speed, which makes it really difficult for you to hit a ball when it's going to the top corner and the speed of your paddle doesn't move fast enough. It's really unfortunate, and I would love to say that Nintendo came up with some amazing ideas when it came to Pong, but they didn't. This here cries and screams as being a ripoff of other better systems, and it's funny to think that Nintendo came from this. Now I know just by looking at this thing, you're probably assuming that this is just a really aged machine that has all this really bad coloration from the years, but believe it or not, this is the original color of the system. See, back in the 1970s, Nintendo probably could have easily done a system that was wood-grained or bright red, which they ended up doing a couple years later with this exact same model, but what you're looking at here is the original color. It's kind of a toasted cream, toasted yellow type thing, which is gross looking, but that's the color they went with. It was only a couple years afterwards that they started experimenting with different colors on their console, but the very first model, the one you're seeing here, is what all of the systems originally looked like. The overall design of the Color TV Game 6 shell is very basic, and while the color isn't all that nice, it does work for what it needs to be. Even though I can't read Japanese, I can see what these games are supposed to be whenever I switch the dials, and there is a nice little power switch right on the top there that's easy to use. And instead of using a power light, as soon as you flick the dial, there's just a red little piece of sticker underneath just to tell you that it's on. So it's basic, but it does get the job done. The game was originally sold for 9,800 yen back in the good old 70s, and it came in this box. Now, while the system itself is pretty much that color, this box would have actually been a little bit more whiter, and the box itself has aged dramatically with a lot of wrecks and stuff on it. However, when you're trying to collect these things, you probably want the box. It came with a manual that told you how to plug everything in and all that fun stuff, but what's really cool about the system is that it runs off batteries. Did I say cool? Because I mean, that's a nightmare. I can't believe it runs off batteries, but a lot of the systems at this time were considered plug-and-play devices, and having a whole power adapter with the machine probably would have been a lot more expensive. So running off those big old batteries it does, and it works pretty well. Now, while most people can find color TV game systems online, I kinda got lucky. I was at a video game store in Pennsylvania called Classic Game Junkie, and they just had it at the bottom of the shelf behind some glass. I didn't think anything of it, but when I saw it, I knew I had to buy it. And not because it was a really good Pong system, because it's not, but because this is the very first Nintendo system ever made. You gotta think of it this way. Before this system, Nintendo had never ventured into making video game consoles for the home market. When this system was introduced, when they created this, it gave them ideas that would eventually result in the Famicom and in the NES. This system is the introduction of Nintendo into the home market, and that is revolutionary. Without this thing, we wouldn't have those amazing systems and games we have now. In fact, Nintendo may have just stayed as a toy company. At this point in time, Nintendo had no idea what they were about to get into, and the Color TV Game 6 is essentially the system that created the future for Nintendo, and that's really awesome.